Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. Wild from WCA Biology B, and I would like to walk you through a replacement portfolio for the one in your lesson. So, in the lesson, you're required to do the phylogenetic tree portfolio, or you're constructing a cladogram, but it's actually kind of a confusing portfolio. It's especially for those that are kind of introductory to cladograms. So instead of using that, I'm going to have you use the one that we're going to go through today in the video. So when you construct a chordate cladogram, so chordates are just animals that basically have a backbone. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but we'll just talk about them as animals that have backbones. So as you can see in this particular diagram, we have a bird, an amphibian, a fish, a rabbit, a lizard, and a human being, all different animals that have backbones. So we're looking at a cladogram, and cladograms are basically family trees, but we're not looking at relationships in terms of like brothers and sisters, moms and dads, aunts and uncles, and that kind of stuff. We're actually looking at evolutionary relationships. We are looking at characteristics that organisms share in common and how that tells us how closely related those organisms are. These types of characteristics that are shared are known as derived characteristics because they can be passed on from parent to offspring, through your genes. And so we can look here at this kind of sample of a cladogram, and it's going to show us three different organisms. We've got a bird listed as letter A, bird listed as letter B, and it looks like a squirrel listed at letter C. Now, what you're going to notice is that on the cladogram, there are certain branch points, and branch points indicate common ancestry. So I always call these like the armpits, wherever two of the lines come together in a Y, that tells us the location of a common ancestor. So we can see that there's a common ancestor right here where B and A come together, and there was a common ancestor here where C branches off from B and A. So that is our common ancestry. Now, the green dot and the orange dot indicate traits that these organisms have in common. For example, the green dot would be a trait that all three organisms have in common, whereas the orange dot would be a trait that only two of the organisms have in common, which is organisms A and B. So the questions here says which two organisms are most closely related, and the organisms that have a armpit or a branch point that's furthest away from the trunk of the tree, which is down at the bottom here, are going to be the two that are most closely related. The green dot is indicating a trait that is shared by all three organisms, and we just want you to suggest a trait. Like, what trait would all three of these have in common? Just think of them, all the different traits that these animals have, and pick a trait that all three may have in common, and then pick a trait that only A and B may have in common. So your answers might vary from those of somebody else in the class, and that's okay. Another example of a cladogram, and this is using an organism known as a Gila monster. And a Gila monster is, I believe it's a type of lizard. And so we're looking at these five species of Gila monsters. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce their names, but the same type of features of a cladogram are going to remain true for this cladogram as they did for the practice one we did on the previous slide. Anywhere there's a little armpit, that's a common ancestor. The further away that armpit is from the base of the tree, the more recent the common ancestor is. For example, where we see number one here, number one would be the common ancestor of all five of the Gila monsters, okay? So you just have to kind of follow the branch up at the tree. Every one of the little cross hatches, those little lines, those are shared traits. So like this cross-hatched line would be shared by only these four Gila monsters, whereas this cross-hatched line down here below number one would be shared by all five Gila monsters, okay? So again, I want you to suggest a shared trait for this one right there. Another way to visualize a cladogram is through a Venn diagram, and this is a circle, kind of set of circles that are all nested together. So what we do is we start with the out group. That's an organism that doesn't have any of the traits in common. For example, our traits here are backbone, feathers, and talons. Those are the three derived characteristics. Now, spiders don't have backbones, feathers or talons, so they're the out group. Whereas the lizard contains only the backbone, the cardinal contains both the backbone and the feathers, and the eagle contains all three. So we kind of move progressively inwards towards the center of that nested circles, and the one that's in the center contains all of the derived characteristics. Then you can take this information and you can construct a cladogram from it. So the one that goes at the point furthest away from the trunk of the tree would be the one that's also inside, right? And the one that's closest to the trunk of the tree is our out group, which is the spider. And each of these lines represents one characteristic that they have. So we can say, which characteristics do lizards, cardinals, and eagles have? That would be characteristic C. Which characteristic does just the cardinal and eagle have? That would be characteristic B. And which characteristic does the cardinal and the eagle have? I'm sorry, just the eagle have and not the cardinal, and that would be characteristic A, right? Then when we get back here to characteristic D, they have that asterisk as well here because that is a characteristic that is for all of them. So just to give you a little hint here, D, a heterotroph is an animal that eats other animals. So all of them are, in this case, animals that, well, I shouldn't say that. A heterotroph doesn't make its own food. It's not necessarily a carnivore. They could be a plant eater or an animal eater, but it's something that doesn't make its own food. So D is a heterotroph, and they actually give you the definition of the heterotroph right there. So finish up that slide. Then you're going to be constructing your own cladogram. And your own cladogram is going to be used, you're going to create it by filling in this chart. So if it contains that characteristic, you put an X. If it does not contain that characteristic, you put an O, kind of like tic-tac-toe, but fancier, right? So 0 or an O meaning it's absent and X meaning it's present. Vertebrae meaning does it have a backbone? Does it have 4 limbs? Doesn't have to be legs, they're just limbs of some kind. Does it have claws or nails? We've already completed the 4-chambered heart for you, so you don't have to worry about that one because that would be a hard one to know. Does it have hair or fur? And does it have opposable thumbs? Okay, and again, that's what you're going to do next. And then you're not going to complete the cladogram yet in this set, but you're going to figure out like what are the traits, what is the trait that all of them have, and that's what's going to go at the base of the tree trunk. And what is the trait that's only found in one group, and that group goes at the head of the tree, the very top of the tree, right? And then finally, you are going to click and drag the derived characteristics here, as well as the animals that have them. Remember, if it has only one of them have it, that puts them right here, and then the trait that that one animal has goes here. If it's something that all of the animals possess, that trait will go down here, and then the organism that only contains that trait but nothing else would go here. Okay, so that's your goal. Now, I didn't have you create this Venn diagram, but you might want to do that on a scratch piece of paper if it helps you to make this. Because ultimately, this is kind of like your end goal, your end project. Okay? So at the end of this, you will have constructed a cladogram, and hopefully you understand a bit more about the process of constructing cladograms and also what derived characteristics are. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a wonderful day.